AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
I'm Courtney Smith.
And I'm Elise Sharp.
And we are two nerds who are here to make Shakespeare easier to understand.
In this podcast, we will explore as many dimensions to Shakespeare's plays as we can by looking at the text, examining the historical context in which the plays were written, and how his plays are viewed through modern lenses of feminism, racism, classism, colonialism, nationalism, ableism, all of the isms.
We will discuss how his plays shaped both the past and present, and, as theater makers, how his plays can be responsibly performed today, all while trying our best to approach his works without giving in to bardolatry.
So, Shakespeare, anyone?
Hi, listeners. Want to support Shakespeare Anyone? Visit shakespeareanyone.com/support or check out the links in our episode description. Now, on to the episode. Hi, Elise.
Hi, Courtney.
How's it going?
It's going pretty well. How are you?
I'm also doing pretty well. Where am I going with this?
I mean, I can't believe that we're here recording our annual postcolonial episode.
Yes. So, listeners, every year in recognition of the National Day of Mourning / Thanksgiving holiday in the United States, we examine how British colonialism is intertwined with Shakespeare. And during our first 4 years, we explored Shakespeare and Postcolonial Theory by reading Jyotsna Singh's Shakespeare and Postcolonial Theory, which is published by Art and Shakespeare. And we looked at the different chapters from her work. And so those topics include Shakespeare and the Colonial Imagination, Shakespeare's World, Immigrants, Others, and Foreign Commodities, Decolonize the Mind Through Shakespeare, and lastly, Intercultural and Global Shakespeare in a Postcolonial World. And last year we finished the book, but we are not done exploring Shakespeare through proto-colonialism, postcolonial theory, and decolonization.
Yes, after we finished the book, we talked about what do we want to do this year. And we made the decision that what we want to do is highlight the work that's being done in decolonial Shakespeares by introducing you to some artists, academics, and activists who are working in the space of decolonizing Shakespeare. And we are so excited today to introduce you to Dr. Katherine Gillen and Ruben Ramirez of the Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva. And for everybody who just listened to our Tempest wrap-up and knows how disappointed we were to not find a production of The Tempest to watch that had any sort of decolonial lens, you're in for a treat, because our friends at the Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva have got us covered.
So, Elise, who is, at least in the context of this conversation that we had and we are sharing with our listeners, Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva?
Dr. Katherine Gillen is a professor of English and Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Texas A&M University, San Antonio. With Kathryn Vomero Santos and Adrianna M. Santos, she co-founded the Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva and is co-editing the 3-volume anthology The Bard in the Borderlands, an Anthology of Shakespeare Appropriations, and La Frontera. She is also working on a monograph titled The Renaissance of Whiteness, The Classical Foundations of Shakespeare's Racial Politics, which examines Shakespeare's use of classical sources within the context of emerging racial capitalism.
We are also joined by Ruben Ramirez, who is an MA student at Texas A&M San Antonio and is currently serving in a graduate assistantship research position with the Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva. His research interests include Latino, Latina, and Latinx literature, eco-criticism, environmental justice, and decolonial theory.
The Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva is an award-winning group of scholars, educators, artists, and activists who engage with Shakespeare in ways that reflect the lived realities of the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. They aim not only to change the way Shakespeare is taught and performed, but also to promote the socially just futures envisioned in El Arte de la Frontera. And now, enjoy our conversation with Dr. Katherine Gillen and Ruben Ramirez of the Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva. Hi, Katherine. Hi, Ruben. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
For our listeners, just to make it really clear, can you please just quickly introduce yourself so that we know our listeners can identify which voice belongs to whom?
Sure. My name is Katherine Gillen, and I'm a professor of English at Texas A&M San Antonio.
And my name is Ruben Ramirez, and I am a graduate student at Texas A&M San Antonio, and I work with Dr. Gillen as a graduate research assistant.
Yes, and we're also both members of the Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva.
Which is what we've invited you to talk about today. We are big fans of the work of the Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva and are so excited to chat with you more about your work and how it can illuminate Shakespeare for our listeners and educators and theater makers. First things first, we ask all of our guests this question. What was your first experience with Shakespeare?
Well, my first experience with Shakespeare is kind of a typical one. I'm pretty sure it was part of the curriculum in high school. My teacher had us, take turns reading like Rose and Romeo and Juliet, but none of us were like engaged with it. And then he would just roll out the TV on the car and we'll watch the 1968 adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, talk about it for a little while, and then that was it, move on. And so my first experience wasn't as engaged as I guess now it is.
Yeah, I think I should admit that my father taught Shakespeare at a small college in Vermont where I grew up. And I think he was probably my first exposure, although I remember people asking me if I was going to teach Shakespeare or be an English professor when I grew up like him. And I always said, absolutely not. Why would I do that? So I think I was resistant because people kept asking me that question. But eventually, as I started really studying Shakespeare more in college, probably, I agree, in high school, I was not very engaged with it. But as I started studying it in college, I got really interested, in part because I felt like some of the received understandings of Shakespeare's plays, sort of the Macbeth is about ambition and Othello is about jealousy, didn't seem to 100% match up with what I was reading. And so I wanted to explore different ways of thinking through some of those questions.
Yeah, Ruben, you said that Romeo and Juliet high school was not as engaged. Katherine mentioned finding ways at access points. What was an access point that you went to that changed Shakespeare for you?
So really, and it's going to be like something that we talk about a lot, is like looking at it through the lens of like these borderland adaptations that I've been kind of just like mirroring. So like reading the original source text and then looking at the adaptation, and it's allowing me like a newer entry point into it, because one side I can actually like see myself within those adaptations, and then now I can kind of like look at it through a sort of different lens with the original source text.
That's a great transition into my next question. For our listeners who may not be familiar, can you share what are the borderlands and what is unique about Shakespeare in this region?
So I like to think of the borderlands as like how Gloria Anzaldúa might put it, as like that third space, that place where like two cultures might intersect and clash. But although like it's just not limited to like a physical division of a border, so to say like the Mexico-United States border, but also like an extension to like a metaphorical ones as well.
Yeah, and my colleagues, Adrianna Santos and Catherine Vomero Santos, and I all lived in San Antonio, teaching at different universities in the city. And we began to think about how our students were engaging or not engaging with Shakespeare. I think Ruben's experience is not unique in any way in terms of students, in some cases, feeling alienated by Shakespeare. I mean, Shakespeare has a lot of colonial baggage. And so we also started seeing that people in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands were adapting Shakespeare in really interesting ways. And I think we were interested in, one, the phenomenon. We were kind of like, why? Why do people keep adapting Romeo and Juliet in multilingual ways, for example? Or why do we keep seeing the ritual of Dia de los Muertos showing up in relation to Shakespearean tragedies? So as scholars, we wanted to study that, but we also were interested in thinking about how those adaptations could be useful in the classroom, and students have responded really well to it. So we do have plays in our anthology, The Bard in the Borderlands, which is an open access anthology, a 3-volume anthology of Shakespeare adaptations. We have plays from California, from New Mexico, from Texas, and from other spaces too that are engaging, as Ruben just said, with borderlands and hybrid spaces and with Mexican American and indigenous identities, but might not actually be set on the border of the US and Mexico. So yeah, we got really interested in studying that, and students have responded really well. And it's been cool to work with theater companies and teachers and activists in the region.
From that sort of the questions that were arising as you were teaching came the Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva. Can you tell us more about the work that Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva does?
Sure. So the Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva fundamentally is dedicated to transforming the way Shakespeare is taught and performed in ways that reflect the lived realities and histories of La Frontera. And we have been really lucky to build a pretty wide network and also tap into networks that already existed of Mexican and American and indigenous theater makers and teachers and, again, activists in the region. So we do a lot of things. I mentioned it earlier, but we have a 3-volume anthology, The Bard in the Borderlands. It's open access. It's published through ACMRS Press, so Arizona State University's Medieval and Renaissance Center. And that anthology was the starting point, because one thing when we started wanting to teach the plays, we found was that we didn't have access to them. And we would have to write to playwrights and say, hey, can I borrow the Word document of your script, and I promise I won't share it widely or do anything with it. And then people would ask us, like, hey, can I teach that thing? And we'd be like, well, we'll connect you to the playwright. But there wasn't a really easy opportunity to share this work. And so we thought it was important to make the plays more accessible. And it's also a little tricky to publish plays just in general. And so we wanted to support playwrights in that way. So the anthology, so publishing is a really big part of what we're doing. We're also developing teaching resources. We've also been involved in some productions of the plays in the anthology and other kind of Borderlands themed productions. And we try to collaborate with other people who are supporting art in the Borderlands and literature and education.
Yeah, and if I might add to what the Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva also does is they fund fellows and graduate research assistants as myself, which allows for like networking with different organizations. Like as Dr. Gillen mentioned, the partnerships that we build within this Colectiva, professional development, it helps with that, and bringing us into like support of communities of scholars, activists, poets, members of community. So it's been really fun working with them.
Yeah, students are a huge part of this project. And we also really wanted to help young scholars who are interested in anti-racist work, decolonial work, those kinds of scholarships, gender and sexuality criticism. We wanted to help those scholars also engage with early modern literature, and also to think transhistorically and transgeographically, to not just stick with whatever is happening in England, but also think about, okay, what's happening in the Americas in, the 16th and 17th centuries, and how are those histories intertwined, and how can we do truly decolonial work in this region where, especially, we're in San Antonio, and you really feel like the layers of colonization in San Antonio. And you definitely have a very vibrant indigenous presence and a vibrant Chicanx and also Black presence in San Antonio. And you see all of these cultures creating amazing art, but also facing various forms of oppression. And so we wanted to provide a way of bringing those things together and to support amazing young scholars like Ruben, who are doing fantastic work.
I want to talk a little bit more about your anthologies. In your introduction to Volume 1 of The Bard in the Borderlands, an anthology of Shakespeare appropriations in La Frontera, you share that Borderlands Shakespeare plays use Shakespeare's work, quote, in innovative ways to negotiate colonial power, to reframe Borderlands histories, and to envision socially just futures, unquote. Can you share some examples of how these plays interrogate the legacy of early modern colonialism and bring some new perspectives to these narratives?
Right off the bat, I can think of the work that Edith Figueroa does in Language of Flowers, which is an adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, sort of does towards interrogating that legacy of early modern colonialism. So like in the adaptation, the setting shifts from Verona, Italy to like Los Angeles in the 90s during Dias de los Muertos. And Romeo is reimagined as like an undocumented immigrant, and Juliet as like a Mexican American Latina. And then through that time, the time spent together, Romeo teaches Juliet some like Nawa, sort of that like original tongue language. And since through colonial legacies such as like assimilation to Western cultures, she's no longer to like speak or understand that language. And so those are some of like the ways that like adaptations are able to do that sort of decolonial work, or having characters wrestle with like loss of identity, language, culture, and like navigating dangerous borders. There's so many like layers to that play. I don't know if y'all have read it yet, but y'all definitely should. It's so good.
Yeah, that play is in volume 1 of the anthology, and volume 1 contains primarily adaptations of Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet. So yeah, lots of great plays there.
Just as a sidebar, I'm in Sacramento, and one of our Chicanx theaters just did Language of Flowers, I think this past summer, and I missed it by like, I was out of town every single performance day, and I was so sad.
Oh, no.
I heard it was so good.
Yeah, we really wanted to see it too. We weren't able to see it, but we were excited to know that it was happening. It's such a good play. Another play that we're very excited about right now is Jose Cruz Gonzalez's play Invierno, which is an adaptation of The Winter's Tale that is set in the central coast of California. And the decolonial work that play does is really fascinating because it was committed to engaging with the culture of the Chumash peoples, who are the original inhabitants and many of whom still live on the central coast of California. And that play actually, it opens with the Samala language, which is the language of the Chumash, and it also includes a lullaby in Samala and is engaging with the theme in The Winter's Tale that what is lost, may be found, and using that to kind of think about language reclamation. And our colleague Katheryn Vomero Santos actually just published a book called Shakespeare in Tongues, which has a chapter on Gonzalez's play. And we're very excited. And Jose Cruz Gonzalez is a well-known Chicano playwright as well. So I think this play is thinking about Indigenous issues, and it's also bringing his own knowledge of Chicanx theater and culture to think about the interrelated histories of, Indigenous peoples and Chicanx people in California.
And how can primary and especially secondary teachers use the frameworks presented in your work in the classroom?
We found that these plays work very well in the classroom. Some teachers have found that it's easier to teach excerpts, especially at lower levels when you might not have time to teach a whole play, or where you might be obligated to teach, say, Hamlet, but you don't want to teach only Hamlet. You could maybe teach a play from something like Hamlet, El Príncipe de Denmark by Tara Moses, which is, again, a kind of Indigenous retelling that engages also with Dia de los Muertos. So we found that people who are in multilingual classrooms or classrooms with English language learners really enjoy teaching these plays, in part because it gives students, again, like Ruben was saying before, different access points. And so whether that's linguistic and it's empowering Spanish speakers to help kind of, help people understand what's going on in the play, or it's just cultural and people are wondering like, okay, what is this musical form of the corrido that we see show up, often replacing Shakespeare's chorus in some of these plays? And that kind of helps, giving students a way to bring their home cultures and languages and rituals into the classroom can be really helpful. So we found that teachers have appreciated that about the plays. We're also working on lesson plans that will eventually be publicly available.
Yeah, for like my perspective as sort of a student that's also like being taught this framework and these adaptations. Again, it's like night and day compared to the student engagement like it was in high school for me. Because currently Dr. Gillen is teaching a graduate course on Shakespeare, race, and colonialism. And so we're jumping between Shakespeare's like source text and the adaptations. So to really see the students who are primarily like Latinx students engaging in Shakespeare in thoughtful ways is like a sight to behold. And it gets me like excited thinking about Shakespeare now.
I was thinking that we could have also said we do have other students who are working with us as well, who are doing really cool work, and many of them are interested in being teachers. So I think that it, again, is this work is arising from teachers and from students who are hoping to be teachers and thinking about the various contexts and the various ways in which Borderlands Shakespeare can be helpful in the classroom. Sometimes, for instance, we've taught poetry, like Iristeanda's poem, To Be a Pocha or Not to Be, just thinking again about identity and questions of assimilation and what it means to speak Spanish or not speak Spanish, but clearly using the to be or not to be framework. And that's a way teachers have engaged with Borderlands Shakespeare, but without having to teach a whole play.
In your experience, are there any plays from Bar in the Borderlands that you've seen students just like really respond to?
Yeah, and I know I'm just like harping on this play by talking about it a lot, but really like the language of flowers has been very responsive in the classroom because you are looking through that like overall theme of like the forbidden love, but in a more approachable and accessible way, not one that's kind of rooted in a more European-centric aspect.
Also, a play that I'm very excited about, which will be in volume 3 of the anthology, which should be coming out sometime soon, is a play called Rough Magic by Andrew Ciañez de la O. And this play, Rough Magic, is a Tempest reimagining, and it is set during Hurricane Harvey in Houston. And it actually takes place in a high school gymnasium. So it's really imagined for young adults. Like it would be a great play to teach in high school. And I know some of our colleagues have done that. And I taught it actually with my colleague, Adrianna Santos, with freshman students at A&M San Antonio last year. And the students really loved it. And this play is really kind of thinking about Afro-Latinx and Chicanx people in Houston, and thinking about the ways their ancestry and also spiritual traditions might help them navigate difficult interpersonal situations. It's also cute. It's a queer love story. The kids are kind of Miranda and Ferdinand figures, and they're trying to get their mothers together. So it very much replaces the patriarchal nature of, Prospero's Island with a much more matriarchal setup. The grandmother is very important in the figure as well. Her name is Paola, and she's more of the Prospero figure, but she's drawing on her own traditions, especially a kind of curanderismo, in which she's thinking about more like nature-based forms of healing. And so it's a really beautiful play, and there's a big, huge storm, and it's funny and cute. So I really think that would be one that's great to teach.
I love that because I'm just thinking about my own experience with Shakespeare. One of the things that was a great entryway was more like pop culture, She's the Man, and those, 90s, 2000s movies. And in addition to like being more relevant, it's also the cultural capital that Shakespeare has in English classrooms, whether you're in high school or in college age, academia. I did a lot of research on like the Folger and how the performance-based practices are really great entryways. And one thing that I saw a gap in was more of the entryways for cultural practices. And so I just wanted to shout out how exciting this is from a teacher perspective, because I'm not a teacher, but I've been studying like education and Shakespeare.
That's fantastic. I also should mention that the music of Selena, the Tejana icon, is kind of the soundtrack of that play Rough Magic, which is another cool entry point. Also, since you mentioned teen Shakespeare, Ruben is writing an amazing paper right now on Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet and how you can kind of read it through Borderlands frameworks. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say about that, Ruben.
Yeah, it's definitely when you read it through like a Borderlands framework, it takes on like a whole new meaning because it is kind of like celebrated as a sort of multicultural, diverse movie, but yet held to like a Borderlands framework. You can see how it reinforces a lot of like colonial ideas, exploitation, because even in the setting where it takes place, like Mexico, the reason that location was chosen was because like it was a cheap location. So it's like there's a lot of on-screen exploitation and off-screen exploitation. So I've been having a go at sort of critiquing in a sense. And then there's also like the villainizing of a Tybalt as like this sort of like violent Latino because he's played by John I'm gonna butcher his last name.
Yeah, John
Leguizamo.
Leguizamo.
Yeah. And so there's a whole aspect that can be explored through that framework.
That's so exciting. I would love to read more about that when you finish.
Send it our way.
Yeah, hopefully I can get it published one day.
Kind of tying into a lot of what we're talking around the academia work with theater companies, you work with educators. I don't know if you feel this. We certainly do. There can be a gap between the work that's being done in Shakespeare academia and work that's being done in Shakespeare performance and production. In what ways can Shakespeare and performance utilize your work to expand their concepts of Shakespeare? Or how is your work influenced by productions past and present?
First of all, our work really arises from just noticing the amazing work that was happening in theaters. So a lot of the plays in our anthology were first performed in community theaters and also in university theaters. We do have one like La Commedia of Errors, which was first performed at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. But many of them were, in spaces where people were thinking like, oh, we should probably do some Shakespeare. But we also want to make sure that our students have culturally, relevant roles that they can play, especially with university theaters. People felt that students needed to do Shakespeare. They needed that on their resumes, but they didn't want to just be like weirdly playing white Hamlets or something like that. So The Language of Flowers, again, the play Ruben was talking about, really comes about in part because Edith Villarreal wanted her students to do culturally relevant Shakespeare that spoke to them. So I think that's really important. And we want to honor that the roots of the project in the theater. Also, I would say, and maybe Ruben, you might have more to say about this, but we often see that theaters want to do diverse Shakespeare or multicultural Shakespeare, and that doesn't always work out well. It's helpful, I think, for that to be informed by scholarship and also be informed by talking about, with the communities people are trying to represent. So we've definitely seen some productions where people are just throwing in a little Spanish, or worse, they're giving into cultural stereotypes of various sorts. And so we really don't want to reinforce that. We want to be really clear that we're doing decolonial work, and also we're happy to support theaters who are hoping to do that they're not quite sure, like, okay, how should I do a Mexican American production? I mean, one answer is you could do an adaptation that's written by a Mexican American playwright. That's, I think, a good answer to that. But also there are other, I think our scholarship might help inform some strategies, or might give them some strategies that would inform their work.
Yeah, and just like piggyback off that, with a lot of this, like the scholarship that comes out of this, it leads into like that whole ethnic component of, again, being like culturally responsive and making sure that you aren't, like Dr. Gillen said, like stereotyping. As the case that I make in the Baz Luhrmann adaptation is that there is a lot of like stereotypic representation of the Latino that does a lot more harm than good when you're trying to be like multi-ethnic inclusive and try to like, take Shakespeare's work and make it more accessible, but in the end you make it more alienating for audiences. And if that's not the work, as Dr. Gillen said, like, this is doing, we want to do more decolonial work.
Mm-hmm. Also, our scholarship is really part of a conversation on pre-modern critical race studies and Shakespeare and race that has been really important in Shakespeare studies in the last, 10, 15, 20 years, but has gained more popularity and, presence recently. So I think that body of work has helped us see what Shakespeare's plays themselves have to say about race and coloniality, and then to better understand the work that adaptations are doing. So I think that's another way that we can support theater makers, is to just help them become a little bit more aware of some of what's happening in the plays themselves.
Yeah. And sometimes in casting or other choices, sometimes like the awareness of the unintended consequences doesn't necessarily go through, like sometimes there are unintended consequences that could be picked up on if there was other voices who are studied on certain topics to help assist casting choices, costume choices, setting choices.
Right. For example, my colleagues and I saw an adaptation of a play where all of the servant characters were Latinx, for example. And there was a logic to that choice, but it wasn't fully thought through in such a way that the implication was sort of just naturalizing the idea of, Latinxes in service roles. And so those kinds of things you really need to think through carefully when you're thinking about how to just make a Borderlands adaptation. It's not really simple. There's a lot to think through.
I think that's a really great note to end it on. So I'm just going to say thank you both for joining us today and for sharing your wisdom. Is there anything you'd like to share with our listeners about Borderlands Shakespeare, the work that you do, that maybe we didn't get to today?
Yeah, I guess I would say that, like Dr. Gillen mentioned earlier, these adaptations are open source. So you can go to the website and you can view every single adaptation that's been published in the anthology. And so there's no excuse not to read these after this podcast.
I love that. And I will say that the Colectiva is very committed to community building. We're very committed to supporting community work. So we love to hear from people who are interested in getting involved in the project. So you can absolutely look up our website at borderlandshakespeare.org. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook, and we would love to hear from you. Also, I should say, since I was talking about Invierno, that we just partnered with the Red Bull Theater in New York on a staged reading of Invierno, and we were really lucky that Madeline Sayet, who is a well-known and accomplished Native American, she's Mohegan, playwright and also director. She directed the play, so we were really excited to have Madeline in that role, and we had some really amazing Indigenous and Latinx actors who were part of the reading, and it was a really great experience. And it also connected to our pedagogical mission because the play was streamed for a week and people were able to teach it in their classes. So please get in touch with us. If you're interested in partnering or you're a teacher or a student who has questions, definitely feel free to get in touch with us. We're pretty approachable.
And we'll put the link to your website in our episode description.
Yes, we would love to hear from people.
Thank you so much.
I'm Courtney Smith.
And I'm Elise Sharp.
This is Shakespeare Anyone?
Thank you so much for listening to Shakespeare Anyone. Works referenced in this episode are available in the episode description. Our theme music is Never Ending Minute by Sounds Like Sander.
If you would like to support us, visit shakespeareanyone.com/support or check out the links in our episode description. You can also hit the subscribe button, like us, leave a comment, write a review, share us on social media, tell a friend about us, all the things. We'd appreciate it. For more, you can visit our website, shakespeareanyone.com, or follow us on Instagram at shakespeareanyonepod.
Now, because you listened all the way to the end of the credits, here is a completely random Shakespeare quote for you.
Hi, this is Katherine Gillen from the Borderlands Shakespeare Colectiva. This quote is from Romeo and Juliet, Act 3, Scene 3, and Romeo is speaking. There is no world without Verona walls, but purgatory, torture, hell itself. Hence, banished is banished from the world, and world's exile is death. Then banished is death mistermed. Calling death banished, thou cutt'st my head off with a golden axe, and smilest upon the stroke that murders me.